Hello, welcome back to Talking Europe. I'm Catherine Nicholson. Now, in this part of the programme, we're talking justice and civil liberties and asking whether our fundamental rights are safe amid sweeping measures taken by governments amid the coronavirus pandemic. We're joined from Brussels by former Spanish Justice Minister, now a Socialist member of the European Parliament and head of its Justice and Civil Liberties Committee, Juan Fernando Lopez-Aguilar. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure.
First question, just starting with some news from your home country, in fact. Just a couple of days after Spain reopened its EU borders and ended its state of emergency, the government has imposed some new lockdowns in local areas when coronavirus infection numbers spiked once again. How concerned are you about reopening too much too soon and a second wave of infections in Spain?
Highly concerned, because it is my duty to recall member states and all governments that they are bound by European law, and there is a European law effective and in action. We have legislated in the European Parliament a Schengen Borders Code, which sets conditions for the members to restore the internal borders within what is called Schengen, which is free movement with no restrictions, with no internal borders. If they have to, and we understand they have to because they have to face this serious coronavirus crisis, they have to also abide by the conditions, including, of course, time-framed. There have to be a time frame and coordination by the Commission. But precisely because we are concerned, we are also ready to move forward and learn the lessons from this terrible experience and, if necessary, to adapt the Schengen Borders Code to this unprecedented crisis.
Well, indeed, because I know that you've been among the MEPs who've spoken publicly, written about wanting a swift return to free movement around the EU. You were celebrating the recent lifting of border restrictions. But as we said, when the virus infection rate is still fluctuating, and not just in Spain, but also neighbouring Portugal, also Germany, which had been celebrated for controlling the virus relatively well, isn't it unwise on a health level to stick too rigidly to these rules that were set down well before we knew about coronavirus?
Actually, they are not that rigid. As a matter of fact, many member states have violated those rules. That must also be said, because there has been no announcement, there has been no sufficient coordination, and at times there has not been the time frame which is imposed by the Schengen Borders Code. But what I mean is that without Schengen, there is no recovery. I would even add, without Schengen, there is no European Union at sight. Schengen is by far the most appreciated asset of the whole European Union experience ever. So it is of the essence that people have the confidence that we have a horizon in which free movement will be restored. Of course, learning the lessons, of course, taking care, of course, with all the conditions to provide public health safety. But we have to face that Schengen is of the essence if the European Union is to be alive.
All right, moving on to the civil liberties part of your job that I mentioned in the introduction to the programme. Amnesty International just released a report talking about policing during the lockdowns in various European states. They say that they disproportionately targeted ethnic minority and marginalised groups with violence or discriminatory identity checks, for example, as well as fines, forced quarantines. Do you believe that there should be a formal investigation into whether there is institutional racism in Europe's police forces?
If there are such allegations, they must be verified. And if there is such thing, of course, not only investigation, but also prosecution. You know why? Because hate crime, hate violence, and racist violence in particular is a serious criminal offense. It is against the law in every possible way. We have a European law here. We have a Charter of Fundamental Rights which protects not only the European citizens, but every human being on European soil. And of course, discrimination on the grounds of race, let alone say for the sake of race, for racism, is completely forbidden, it's illegal, it's criminal. So we have to mindfully verify every allegation in that regard. And of course, education is of the essence, criminal law is of the essence, but also anti-discrimination strategies. And that is something we do care about in the committee. I chair the Committee of Civil Liberties, Fundamental Rights, Justice and Home Affairs. We relate regularly to Commissioner Dalli, which is the one in charge of equality. That portfolio has as a major duty to deliver on a European anti-discrimination strategy, which includes, of course, the verification of every allegations. We also have a fundamental rights agency, which is of the essence, so that we make sure that racism has no place in Europe, not whatsoever.
Also, on a civil liberties point, a lot of people have been very worried that their civil liberties, their privacy, is being infringed by various anti-coronavirus measures, not least track and trace apps that people are being asked to use, as well as facial recognition technology that's used in some parts of France, for example. Does it concern you that this has all been brought into our lives, seemingly without there having been much, if any, public debate?
Of course, it does concern me. I'm a European citizen. I'm a jurist. I'm also chair of the committee in charge precisely to make sure that that may not happen. Yes, we are concerned about emergency measures. We have taken note that the situation is unprecedented. We have taken note that many governments in the member states have been compelled to adopt measures that were not previously foreseen. Some member states did have constitutional dispensations to provide for such a situation. That was the case of Spain. Some did not and resorted to unprecedented acts, decrees or laws or emergency measures that, yes, they have imposed severe restrictions, and fundamental rights and liberties have paid the price. We must care that normality is restored, that rights are respected, that every abuse is to be verified, prosecuted against, or punished if that is the case. But more than that, we also have to make sure that member states do not discriminate against other European citizens. And we also have signals that that might also have happened and be a risk. When you impose restrictions, for instance, for free movement of people, you cannot impose discriminatory measures against certain categories of European citizens, let alone say on the sake of ethnic origin, religion, cultural background, profiling. And when it comes to apps, the same goes with the data protection regulation we adopted in this European Parliament. It has to be respected, which means that those apps have to be incorporated on a voluntary basis. Consent is of the essence. Those apps are to be deactivated once the situation has been overcome. And of course, it is of importance that the confidentiality of those data are not used for any other purpose than for health and public health purpose, not for security matters, not for profiling people and discriminating against certain categories of European citizens.
And when you say that the EU has to, or Europe has to make sure that that doesn't happen, those various things that you listed, what do you mean by that? Do you mean that it should be possible for various governments to be taken to the European Court of Justice, or there could perhaps be funds withheld?
The European Union is a union of law. You know that? That means that the Commission is guardian of the treaties and of European law. The Commission has the duty to oversee the behavior of the member states when it comes to compliance with European law. And the Commission has precisely ways and means in order to secure that law is respected. First of all, infringement procedures when it comes to violations of European law. And besides, bringing some member states to the court when those violations are persistent or of importance. We also, in the European Parliament, do have a say. It's Article 7 when it comes to fundamental rights, democracy and rule of law. And we have set in motion that extraordinary technique of the Treaty of the European Union when violating the principles that are enshrined in Article 2. There is a way. Article 7, we have set that in motion. Namely, 2 member states are by now under the focus of the attention of Article 7 procedure, Hungary and Poland. Everybody knows that. So it should be also reminded that all member states are bound by the European law, even in extraordinary circumstances. I have said it more than once. Law matters. European law matters. It is not only that it matters, even in times of crisis. I would say it matters especially in times of crisis.
All right, we've just got a couple of minutes left. I'd like to just get your thoughts quickly on the proposed European Union recovery plan, a proposed €750 billion plan scheduled to be discussed. Perhaps given the green light at a summit in mid-July. But we keep hearing about how difficult the negotiations are, major sticking points like joint borrowing by the whole EU to finance grants for member states. Now, your Prime Minister, Pedro Sánchez, said that the future of the European project is at stake here. Now, we certainly are in a historic moment of economic crisis, but is that a bit of an exaggeration to try and put pressure on other member states?
No, I do agree 100%. It is actually so. It takes a European response, and it is about now that the European Union learns the lessons of the mistakes made when handling the so-called Great Recession. By that crisis, we saw too little, too late, and in the wrong direction. Now we are seeing that the Commission is responding to the mandates of the resolutions that have been adopted in the European Parliament. We want an ambitious response, a truly European response, based on solidarity, because this is nobody's fault. It is absolutely obnoxious, absolutely unacceptable that some member states do take the blow for trying to repair the damage of the coronavirus crisis, because this is nobody's fault. There are no culprits here. There are only victims of the coronavirus crisis. So every effort has to be supported by the European Union in all. That's what the European Parliament mandates to the Commission.
All right, Juan Fernando Lopez-Aguilar, we are out of time, unfortunately, but thank you very much for being our guest today on Talking Europe.
Thank you for having me here.
Thanks to you as well for watching. We hope to see you soon on France 24 for more European news.
Versailles, the Louvre, Mont Saint-Michel are well-known stars of French heritage. But French genius and France harbours many other hidden treasures. The arts, gastronomy, architecture, as well as nature's wonders. Come along with France 24, discover France's living heritage. From young apprentices to accomplished craftsmen and farmers, to Michelin star sporting chefs. Meet these people whose passion for their professions preserve and drive French heritage.
You are here on France 24 and France24.com.